Okay, that 1 minute is over, so I'll introduce General Avivi. I'm sure that many of you know him. I'll just mention that there are also reporters tuning in Zoom. So there are the reporters in the room and the reporters on Zoom as well. Brigadier General in Reserves Amir Avivi is the founder and chairman of Israel Defense and Security Forum, the IDSF. During his military career, Avivi held several senior roles in the IDF, including Deputy Comptroller of the Security Forces, Director of the Office of the Chief of Staff, Deputy Commander of the Gaza Division, Commander of the Sagi Division, Commander of Battalion 605, and Commander of the School of Combat Engineering. His organization has been very active over the past few years in advising administrations, both in Israel and overseas, about Israeli strategic issues, and of course, providing its policy recommendations. So General Avivi, thank you so much for joining us at, of course, very late notice. We appreciate your time, and we will very much like to hear your insight about the security implications of the imminent deal, and of course, anything else you'd like to share.
Thank you very much. Israel set at the beginning of the war 3 very clear goals that need to be achieved in Gaza. The first goal is eradicating Hamas as a governmental and military entity. It doesn't mean that we're talking about reaching every single terrorist. It means bringing down this organization and its control over the Gaza Strip, dismantle its military capabilities and its governmental capabilities. The second goal was to bring back all our hostages. And the third goal is to make sure that never again there will be a terror army in the Gaza Strip. And this has implications talking about the long-term vision of Israel, how to secure Gaza in a way that there won't be a terror army there. And basically looking at a reality where Israel will have full freedom of operation in the Gaza Strip in the long term. So when we talk about this deal, we have to understand the overall context, because I believe that the Prime Minister and the government of Israel intend to reach all the goals. It's a long campaign that has many stages. We started with being on defense on all different fronts and on the offensive in Gaza. After 10, 11 months of really operating in Gaza and dismantling Hamas as a military entity, we shifted the center of gravity to Lebanon. We sent more than 14 brigades to Lebanon, and quite fast brought Hezbollah on its knees and created a new reality that impacted also Syria. The killing of the leadership of Hezbollah, especially Nasrallah, had a huge impact in Syria as well. And this changed the reality in Syria, and Iran now is out of Syria, and Syria is controlled by Sunni elements, some of them radical. This is the reality. And as Israel was dismantling the terror infrastructure around us and also attacking Iran and depriving Iran from some strategic capabilities and air defense, we had the elections in the US, and President Trump is about to start his second term as president. And this is the context in which we need to understand this deal. The deal we're talking about is a deal that was set in May. Hasn't changed, same deal. But from May all the way to now, to January, Hamas constantly rejected the deal. They rejected the deal because they believed that there will be enough international pressure to make Israel stop the war. They believed that the actions of Hague, the pressure coming from the administration, the current one, the pressure inside the Israeli society, believing that as long as they hold the hostages, there will be internal turmoil, there will be demonstrations, and this might bring Israel to elections. And they believe that elections will bring to a change of government and will end the war, because they believe that this specific government is resolute about winning the war. So they had no incentive to release hostages. But the new reality where they lost Hezbollah, Syria changed, Iran has been weakened, and more than that, a president that says that if they don't release the hostages by the 20th of January, there will be hell. this is what is making now Hamas reconsider their position and be willing, and this we'll see in the coming days, but I believe that there is a good chance that they will be willing to agree to a deal that has been on the table for a long time, to release the hostages. Israel is looking at an overall deal which has stages. The first stage is releasing the hostages that are more urgent, and women and children. But Israel looks at it as a deal that at the end of the day, we want to bring everybody back. Throughout these negotiations, Hamas insisted on the one thing that Israel is not willing to do: stop the war. And I think that this deal we are seeing now, there is no commitment on the Israeli side to stop the war. Israel is staying still on the Philadelphia corridor. Israel is staying in buffer zones inside Gaza. So basically all the buffer zone of Gaza will be with Israeli presence. Israel is agreeing to a month and a half of ceasefire, but then Israel will probably go back to fight. Hamas, on the other hand, they are getting time to regroup and reorganize. They are releasing many prisoners, and this enhances their control also over Judean Samaria, the West Bank, the Palestinian Society, which is really today hateful towards the Palestinian Authority, that is perceived really as a terrible organization that is going against its own society. And Hamas believes that they can maximize now what they can get, and they don't know what will happen from the 20th of January. Now, it's interesting to see that discussion inside the Israeli society, that people are saying this is a terrible deal, releasing many terrorists, this is very dangerous for Israel. Palestinian citizens are going to go back to the north, they are losing a huge asset, and this is terrible, and we might lose the war. And these concerns are right, and they're right to be concerned about these issues. On the other hand, there are people who say, but you know, we need to release our hostages, the government failed, and hostages were taken, we have a responsibility, it's a goal of war, and we need to release them. They're also right. There is no right or wrong here, everybody is right. It's a matter of what we prioritize at this specific moment. And at this specific moment, looking at the overall 3 goals of war we set in Gaza, we are prioritizing releasing the hostages. We have an opportunity to do that. We want to push this. It doesn't mean that Israel is giving up its goals of war. And I think that people tend to also miss the big picture. The big picture is Iran. The big picture is getting the US administration on board to fully attack the nuclear sites and bring down the Shia axis. The full picture is getting also the administration to change completely its policy regarding humanitarian aid. We understand that the one thing that is keeping Hamas alive is humanitarian aid. They are seizing all the humanitarian aid. They are selling it in overpriced amount of money to their own people. They are recruiting thousands of youngsters by threatening them that if they don't recruit to Hamas, they won't give food to their families. They are recruiting them by giving them 100 or 150 shekels. They get this money from smuggling money and from selling the humanitarian aid. Without the humanitarian aid, Hamas cannot exist. And as we're entering this deal, which I hope will happen, Israel has to recalculate and build a new strategy how we bring down Hamas. We cannot bring down Hamas without disconnecting this organization from the society. We in IDSF presented the government and the army a plan of building humanitarian islands or zones or bubbles, areas where we can direct the Palestinian society to areas that are under Israeli security
Amir, can you repeat the beginning of the your answer just because we had
Yeah.
a technical issue.
So Israel has to build a strategy after we release our hostages, even after the first phase, after we release the 33 hostages, how we amount the pressure on Hamas and how we bring down Hamas as a governmental and military entity. And the key issue is the humanitarian aid. We need to distribute it completely different. There are some aspects of it that maybe we don't need to do at all, like fuel, for example. But we'll have to direct the Palestinian citizens to designated humanitarian areas under Israeli control, security control, but with the UN and all the international organizations doing their job in an environment that can do the job. And the only environment is Israel securing them and securing the citizens in a way that Hamas cannot affect the citizens and cannot recruit them and cannot endanger them or coerce them to do things they maybe don't want to do. The humanitarian aid is the key to bring down Hamas, and we have to disconnect Hamas from the society. And I think that this coming administration is going to be much more open to solutions that will help shorten the war, because what's happening now is that Hamas is rebuilding itself faster than we are destroying them. It's not good news. We have hit them really hard. We have dismantled their battalions. We apprehended many terrorists. We killed many terrorists. But still now they are trying to get more and more operative, some of them 15, 16, 17 years old. And if we want this phenomenon to stop, and if we want to talk about future rebuilding of Gaza, we need to shorten the war. There is no shortening of the war without getting control of the humanitarian aid. Netanyahu spoke about that a few months ago in the UN. It's something that obviously he understands, but he hasn't been able to impose it on the army or get the agreement of the current administration to do something about it. So we have a lot of tools how to fight Hamas after this deal. Also, kicking them out of Qatar, targeting the leadership of Hamas around the world. There are many things Israel and the US can do. And so I understand the concern of big parts of the Israeli society that this deal might mean the end of the war and Hamas will stay in Gaza and rebuild itself. I don't think that this is what Israel is planning. I think that Israel is determined to destroy Hamas. But we also have a goal that says we need to bring back the hostages, and time seems right for bringing back our hostages.
Okay, we're going to do the opposite of what we did in the last session and first take questions from the floor and then open to questions on the Zoom. Yes, so just please introduce yourselves before.
Hi, I'm Jorge Vestas from the Spanish News Agency. Can you give us more detail about how degraded the military capabilities of Hamas are? Because we see Hamas, they're launching rockets, and I guess a lot of people are wondering how effective has the army been in that sense?
Hamas shot in one day 4,000 rockets at the beginning, at the 7th of October. Today, they're trying to build a rocket here and there. They don't really manage to renew their industries. Just this morning, Israel attacked 40 different sites. So Israel is degrading them all the time, but they're trying to renew capabilities. From the prices of the munitions inside Gaza, you understand how much they're lacking munitions, and this is due to the fact that we are controlling the perimeter, we are controlling Philadelphia. So everything they do is based on the materials and things they have inside Gaza, and it's not endless. So the pace in which they are rebuilding itself is very slow, but obviously if Israel retreats from Philadelphia, if we open the border again, if they will be able to smuggle endless amount of weapons, capabilities, money, technologies as they did before from Egypt, then we'll face a different scenario. This is why Israel insisted on staying on Philadelphia. So even if Hamas has a month and a half, which will help them regroup to a certain extent, it's not exponential. It's not something that can be very dramatic, but we'll have to deal with this afterwards.
Ralph Dekkers, Telegraaf. And what about the army leaving the corridor in the center of Gaza? What consequences that might have security-wise?
So Israel used the north as a leverage, not allowing people to go back. I'm not sure that word to go back because everything is ruined, but this was something we used as a leverage to get our hostages. Once we have a deal that enables us to get the hostages, this is something Israel was willing to give up. By the way, it took us a week and a half, maybe, to move 1 million Palestinians from Rafah to the humanitarian zone. If we need in a month and a half or two to move again 1 million people from the north back to the south, I don't think it's so problematic. So I don't think this is something that really is dramatic, talking about the overall strategy. And also, as I mentioned, these humanitarian bubbles that need to be built, it actually requires us to move all the Palestinians from this specific humanitarian zone on the sea to areas close to our border so we can secure them and enable humanitarian aid to reach them without Hamas. So I think we have to reverse the whole way we're dealing with the humanitarian aid. Because when you have to cross all of Gaza to reach the humanitarian zone in the sea that anyway is completely controlled by Hamas, we're not able to bring directly to the citizens the humanitarian aid. It sits by Hamas. If we want to control it, we have to move the society closer to us, secure a perimeter, and then give them humanitarian aid without Hamas being able to intervene. So in this sense, I'm less worried about the fact that anyway they're moving back east and north and south. It's something that if we do the right things afterwards, it should be helpful for us, not problematic.
But it doesn't bring more risk, bringing a large amount of the population towards the border of Italy.
So this is why Israel is keeping a perimeter around Gaza. It's a kilometer on the east. It's bigger in the north. In the north, it's bigger because we need to renew the train from the south to Tel Aviv. And the train is endangered by anti-tank missiles, and this is why the buffer zone Israel is building is much bigger. This is why we're fighting in Bet Hanun and clearing these areas. And I don't think the Palestinians will be, or I hope, they won't be allowed to go back to these areas. This might be a problematic in order to renew the train.
Yesterday, the day before, Wall Street Journal just has a long, extensive report about Sinwar's brother in Gaza, Mohammed, and he's becoming sort of the leader, regrouping and re-establishing Hamas. How is Israel military is approaching this?
He's definitely enhancing his control. He's controlling well the south and center of Gaza. He has more difficulties controlling the north. And I'll give an example of how Israel can take advantage from moving the people. Now, Muhammad Sinwar is in the areas of Khan Yunis, the humanitarian zone. It's surrounded by many, many citizens. And obviously, it's very hard to find him and deal with him. If we move the people north, but in a monitored way, which this is what's supposed to happen, not letting terrorists go back north, just the citizens, it might create a reality where he will be more exposed, and this might help us. So every change has a danger, but it also creates opportunities. And what we're encouraging the army and the government is, okay, you already are doing this deal. It has some dangers. Let's talk about the opportunities. Let's seize the moment, because I think that the movement of the society will create many good things for Israel, like intelligence, like operational opportunities, and we'll have to make the best of something that looks challenging.
We're almost out of time, so Ricky?
Okay, in the ceasefire deal, is there any provision that you know of for permanent Israeli presence after a full ceasefire? And does Israel retain the right to attack Hamas if there's a violation of the ceasefire, as in the ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah?
I think that the long-term vision of Israel is overriding security responsibility of Israel over the Gaza Strip for years, many, many years. Unless there will be complete radicalization of the society and something big will change. Israel understands that we need the full freedom of operation like we have in Lebanon, and maybe even more. And this I don't think is going to change because very fast we'll see terror cells rebuilding themselves inside Gaza, as we're seeing now, even when Israel is operating inside Gaza. Gaza is a long-term issue. Anybody who thinks that, it's a short war, let's get it over with, and, we find some resolution and everything will be fine. This is not the reality in Gaza. And especially looking at the fact that the Israeli government is saying, and rightly so, that the day after in Gaza, there won't be Hamas, not Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but also not the Palestinian Authority. So this requires new ideas. This requires building new leadership in Gaza based mostly on the local clans, on the cities, some kind maybe of cantonization. And this is not going to happen in a day. And then really changing the education in Gaza will take years. So we have to be patient and understand that this is a long-term process. Gaza is a ticking bomb that diffusing it's going to take many years.
We have time for 2 last questions over Zoom, unless somebody here wants to ask something else. Okay, so 2 things. One, specifically about the stages of the deal. If you have any insight on the methodology and whose interest it would be to do it in 2 different parts.
The overall deal?
No, the specific hostage deal that we're seeing now that is supposed to be divided into sections.
One of the challenges is that we don't know from the 33 hostages who is alive and who is not. So we don't know exactly how many terrorists will be released. It will be dependent on what we see on the ground. So it will be assessed every day. And Hamas is going to do everything it can to obstruct it, not to release, try to change in the middle. They're going to play every play they can do to disrupt everything. We cannot trust them at all. They did that in the first deal. Every day was a challenge. Every day we had to say, okay, that's it. We're going back to war. It's very hard to predict how this will work throughout the months and a half of the deal. We have to be resolute, and we have to be crystal clear. They don't deliver all the hostages safely. There will be a price to pay, and also afterwards, we'll put pressure on them in different ways. We are supposed to start negotiating the next stage of the deal in 2 weeks. It will be challenging because Hamas will insist on ending the war. Israel is not going to agree to end the war. And therefore, the amount of pressure that we'll have to put on them will have to be huge in order to really make them concede and give us all the hostages.
And a second question, actually, about the northern front. We have the expiration of the current truce in a week and a half. Do you have any insight or indications what we might see?
So, talking to the commanders in the north, it's clear that for Israel, what matters is not the 60 days. What matters is the deployment of the Lebanese army effectively in the region and making sure they do what they are supposed to do, dismantle all the infrastructure of Hezbollah, push Hezbollah north of the Litani, and not enable the buildup of Hezbollah again anywhere, not in the south of Lebanon and not anywhere else. The IDF will maintain full freedom of operation in Lebanon everywhere to enforce the reality where Hezbollah cannot rebuild itself anymore, whether it's in the border with Syria, in Beirut, anywhere it's needed. There is a mechanism. Every time we see something wrong, we ask the Lebanese army to deal with this. Mostly they don't. And then in 96 hours, the IDF attacks. We have targeted more than 45 terrorists since the beginning of the ceasefire. And this dynamic will remain. If the Lebanese army fully deploys, doesn't matter when, 60 days, 90 days, 100 days, the IDF will retreat to the border. But remember that the fence is not the blue line. There are areas that Israeli area is beyond the fence, and in these areas, the army is now building bases on the other side of the fence, but it's Israeli soil. Will maintain freedom of operation, and what Israel is trying to push, and I think this will be discussions with President Trump, is maintaining a dead zone, 2-3 kilometers. It's areas the IDF completely flattened, and as long as Resolution 1559 is not imposed, and there is no dismantling of Hezbollah, Israel might insist on this dead zone and not let citizens go back rebuilding their lives in the dead zone. So the dead zone means that there might be a town on the other side, that half of it is in the dead zone, and half of it can be rebuilt. So I think this will go on for a long time, these discussions, until we reach the point where we see Lebanon moving towards the, I would say, moderate Sunni states and not Iran. This has to do with bigger issues. This has to do with an attack on Iran and bringing down the Shia axis. This has to do with building an alliance, a Western Israeli Sunni alliance, normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia and with big part of the Muslim world, including Indonesia. We want an alliance that will be a magnet to countries like Lebanon and push them towards a Western Israeli moderate Sunni alliance and not towards radical Sunnis or Shia axis.
Guys, we're actually out of time, and we're gonna have one-on-one interview for General Avivi after this. So if anybody else, given that he actually has the time, would like to do that as well, please let Esti know. And we're gonna take a 5-minute break while that happens before our next speaker. So first of all, I do want to thank General Avivi for coming again at the very last second. It was very insightful, and we're all very hopeful. So thank you.
I mean, I have something to eat outside.